It is Thursday, September the 16th, 2021 at 9:01 a.m. here in southern Arizona. And this is the TheOneHiraethProject's DiaryCast, episode number 5, entitled Capacity. Let me start with a walk that I took on Monday, September the 13th. About 3 to 4 miles from the starting point, as I was headed south down Camino del Sol, a woman on a bicycle traveling north stopped right in front of me. Camino del Sol is a 6-mile paved 2-lane road beginning at a roundabout and ending with a T in a high-end residential neighborhood. It has generous margins on either side, offering a designated safe bicycle path with nicely landscaped center margins, adding a kind of picturesque quality for the casual traveler. Sidewalks, however, are sparse and only found on about 5 to 10% of its full length, mostly around the golf course. Now, this 50-something woman stopped to explain to me that the city council here in this town where I'm currently located has recently allocated $49 million for road improvements, and they're exclusively to be used for the purpose of managing capacity. I thought that was quite interesting. It couldn't be used for anything else, and it was her idea to petition the council to use a portion of these funds to construct sidewalks along this heavily trafficked margin area, because cyclists like her were often positioned to move into traffic when runners, walkers, animal lovers with their pets, and even golf carts were forced to share this small designated bike path margin area. And as she put it, capacity had just as much to do with these other alternative forms of transport as they did with vehicles along Camino del Sol. What got my attention in part was her focus on the term margins and how these margins had been designated for the safety of cyclists, yet were frequently and regularly utilized by benefactors of all sorts. The reason for this focus of mine on this concept of margins was literally moments before I was listening to some program through my earbuds where the main character was struggling between doing the right thing and following the rules for his high-profile position with the Colorado Department of State. And he was talking to his wife, a senior police detective, about balancing the value of working within these rules and maintaining his integrity within the system, yet remaining a man of conscience. And how he could do that was finding a way to feel comfortable with his decision to bend the rules or work in the margins. And I thought that was really interesting. And then, just a few seconds later, this woman on a bike stops me and starts talking about that same concept of margins, but used in a completely different way. Now, this was significant because prior to starting the walk, I was actually thinking about writing in the margins of a book I was reading, something I have never done, not even in college. I always felt it was more important to keep the book pristine and write on a piece of paper. And I wanted to point out locations of this passage that I wanted to be able to quickly come back to again and again. When this fictional character through my earbuds was talking about working in the margins, I actually visualized what he was saying at that time in terms of what I had thought about doing in that book prior to leaving on that particular walk. So now here's a stranger on a bike bringing a concept of margins into focus, yet again, with another point of view. Now that's 3 mentions of margins within this exceedingly short period of time, and that was significant enough for me to take notice. And with that, the woman had my full attention. I felt whatever she was about to say was being presented to me in this way so that I would pay attention to it. That's kind of an example of how data gets to me or knowings come my way. Now, she asked me if I would help add weight to her petition for these additional sidewalks along Camino del Sol by sending the council an email in support of her proposal. Now, of course, I was sympathetic with her view and her logic and offered encouragement throughout the entire exchange. But what I just didn't have the heart to tell her is that I'm not from here. I'm just a long-term seasonal visitor to the area. I believe that she's seen me walking down that road and other roads while she's on her bicycle, because being here now for 4 months, you begin to recognize the same people, whether you pass them as walkers or runners or, dog walkers or on bicycles. So I didn't want to discourage her and make her feel uncomfortable that she just spent all this time explaining this to me and there wasn't a darn thing I could do about it. But it did get my attention. And the thing is, when she was done, knowing there wasn't really anything that I could do directly to take action as a non-resident, what I did do was take a beat and open my mind to the quiet and the nature that was around me, to wait and see how her message of this collective communal value in the margins could offer me some kind of a takeaway. Well, the awareness of this takeaway, this knowing, this communication imparted through repetition and synchronicity, purposed with intent through this act of noticing, was almost immediate, and it continued to present and kind of unfold as I walked southbound down that same margin that she had been talking about. And it had a singular purpose. And it was based on a singular word. The overall concept of her presentation, the one that was observed from another perspective, one contained in a single word, the word was capacity. Now, capacity, if you look it up in the dictionary, it refers to the maximum amount that something can contain or can produce, or the ability to do something, a mental, emotional, or physical ability of some kind. In this woman's case, it was the mandate for use of funds exclusively earmarked for road repairs and improvements in the management of capacity. So I took a moment, think about it. Management of capacity. Well, therein lie my message. Now, how do I apply this management of capacity in a bigger knowing, tell me more, so to speak. So as I continued my walk, I had 3 different perspectives in the way in which I ultimately looked at this. The first perspective had to do with the margin of a book. The working in the margins when it comes to analyzing things in our mind, and things that are more of the tangible world, like road margins. So it had to do with perspective, how we perceive capacity and therefore find a way to effectively manage it. Well, when it comes to the margin of a book, when someone adds content there, they expand the awareness or the shape, the space of the significant portion of that page beyond the body to encompass the more in the margin. When you're working with margins, say, in contemplation of something that you want to decide to do, when you make choices that we have to live with as they relate to our personal trust, when it comes to doing right and wrong and how to balance such in our lives and actions, when compliance to the rules which are contrary are written in the present day narrative, and say the moral challenge that burdens or broadens the conceptual area of consideration when we deal with our everyday authority, that too is a way to perceive the importance of margins when you're talking about capacity. Now let's just get down to the brass tacks of the road margins, especially when constructed with the purpose to accommodate alternate modes of transport. But when these alternate modes evolve to a degree when they are the customary user of the roadways, more so than the vehicles that the roads were designed for, how do such needs get addressed in terms of efficiency and the management of capacity? Well, each of these has to do with, I'll call it untraditional views of capacity and management, and how the unexpected, unexplained, untraditional actually becomes part of that management process. Well, with those three things in mind, my mind really started to expand. And then a second application to the concept of capacity management came to me, and it had to do with micro versus macro when it comes to capacity. Now, the best way for me to describe this is with kind of a short story. An acquaintance of mine writes a weekly rhyme on a website called TheRememberings.com. And with rare exception, his creations have a theme that is universal, global, food for expanded thought kind of thing. And the other day, actually last Wednesday, when I read his most recent rhyme, which is poem and rhyme, because he likes to call them rhymes and I see them more as poems, so sorry, slip of the tongue there. I actually thought about suggesting that he shift his focus, just for, a breath of fresh air, from the massive to a more minimalist view. So instead of talking about the big issues, the theoretical questions of the cosmos that he talks about, and I laugh, I shouldn't do that, because these creations are so eloquent and moving, and they catch my breath every week. But that he focus on a single moment, like, say, the smile of a child's face at that crescendo of a victory, or maybe just a feeling, and dissecting that feeling that someone has in a particular moment in a metaphor, and then reassembling it in such way to examine it in a moment of life that is a little more progressive. Or maybe something as simple as the flight of a butterfly, whatever. But then what I realized was that this thought that I had within the last week, actually last Wednesday, it wasn't one that I pursued because I felt, well, it's really not my business to tell this person how to write, although I thought that it might be interesting as a reader to view something a little bit more, minimalistic, and just to see how it came out. And might offer them, the opportunity to try something new. I realized that it too also reflected capacity, and this came to me on that walk. Now, capacity in this view exists in those big ideas, and it exists in the small one. It's just a different type of capacity. And if you expand into the margins on the big issues, when one focuses on the theoretical, let's say the macro of global proportions, and talks about it in terms of example, it also exists in the micro, but in an unexpected way. You take that moment of victory, for example, that feeling, that butterfly in flight, and you widen the thought chain in any of an infinite number of directions. Anything from what led up to that moment, how it feels to the writer from an experiential level, its implications, let's say, or even a more panoramic view of how it relates to others in that situation and their extensions there outward from there. It's the margins. It's the management of capacity expanded in those margins. Now, the third and final application I thought of that came to mind before I realized that I had gotten my takeaway and then some has more to do with multidimensionality, the knowings or the communications that come our way. And it has to do with mind capacity or soulful capacity or consciousness capacity, kind of in the way in which they work together. So take a mind and fill it with thoughts. Now, once it's full in its capacity, at least until at some point when you begin to process things and move them through the system so that you leave room for more things to enter your mind. That too is like traffic moving or being static along any kind of an interstate. The one that comes to mind is the Long Island Expressway. Boy, can that thing bottleneck. But if there's limited traffic, like really late into the wee hours of the night or the morning, you can fly. And it's the same road. It just has to do with, capacity. Well, when we get stuck and there's a kind of mental capacity, nothing more can get through. When we begin to allow the free flow of information and thought through in kind of a consistent flow, we allow our mind to take on more. But many of us get stuck and we repeat the same thoughts over and over and over in our mind. We just, I can't even think of the right word for that. But there is no flow because it's static, it's stagnant, and we won't release it to let the more in. Nobody's going off on the exit ramps or anything like that. Well, once a constant flow begins to take place, we become more tolerant. We become more aware of varying opinions simply because we're allowing more and more and more information to flow in and flow out without really stopping much more than to absorb it or take it in. Well, that's the way we experience many things. When we open to more data frequencies, which are waveforms that are unseen yet present, something unique and mystical happens. Once at this place of continuous capacity for more, not holding on to or being able to more rapidly process that which, say, we have to process as humans in form, we actually allow for a state of no thought, where chatter kind of dissipates and disappears, where communications with that which might be referred to as spiritual or cosmic or dimensional, that space begins to open, to flow, and the capacity has expanded into the margins. And it is in that place of the margins where all possibility now is free to transit. So margins, capacity expanding into the margins, something to ponder. And for this week, I'll leave it there.